content isn't everything. It's the only thing. Learn from the smartest minds in media as they discuss how businesses, brands, influencers, and media outlets are leveraging content to reach fans better than ever before. Presented by JAKK Media.
All right, today on the Media Mindset, we have a very special guest, Kim Patel, who currently serves as the Global Director of Corporate Strategy at Vice Media. Kim, first off, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. And just to give the listeners at home a sense of what you do, what is the role of a Global Director of Corporate Strategy at a company like Vice? What do you do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me. So I'm basically like a firefighter. That's essentially what I would say it was. But of course, not doing the great job of saving people's lives that real firefighters do. However, I'd say that when I think about my daily objective, it's just to make the lives of those who are actually going into the field and reporting stories for people who don't have voices in third world countries and putting their lives at danger. It's my job to be able to make sure that they can do that. And that comes in many forms, whether that's trying to grow the company by creating more revenue opportunities so that I can make bigger budgets so that journalists can tell more stories, or whether that's fixing operational issues that make their lives harder to be able to go and get the right story and to be able to tell it in a compelling way. So it's kind of a mix of those things on a day-to-day basis.
So you really are just kind of going around putting out the little fires that come up throughout the company.
Definitely. And then I think, on top of that, because I'm one of the youngest people that's close to the C-suite, I get to see a lot. So I think I use a lot of that to then build out other types of programs for a lot of our employees. So we have just built out Vice Communities. So that's trying to bring in mentorship, trying to expose younger students in high school and middle school, especially ones from urban communities, to careers in journalism, careers in production, kind of what that looks like. And that's been really important to me. So I've been kind of carrying that out as well.
Excellent. So can you tell us about your career journey? How did you end up in this position and kind of the journey that brought you to near the C-suite at such a young age?
So I always wanted to be Phil Banks from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. He was my role model when I was a kid.
Okay.
Yeah, so I thought I was going to go to Princeton Law School. That's not a real thing. And go be a big hotshot lawyer and a judge. Because I saw Phil Banks on TV doing that.
Wait, he went to Princeton Law School?
Yeah, that's yeah.
Oh, wow.
That doesn't exist, by the way.
First bomb dropped already.
You don't have to, when you're, whatever podcast app you're listening to this on, you don't have to leave the app and Google that because it doesn't exist.
It's not
We're
real,
confirming that.
I found that out at a later age. It was very disappointing. So
you're applying to law schools and you're like, Princeton, why won't you accept my app?
I feel like they should have made a law school just to piggyback off the show.
So when I went to NYU for undergrad, I thought that I was going to go into politics, be a lawyer, kind of work for public sector. I became an investment banker, so that really took a big flip real quickly. And the biggest reason for that is I needed money. I had $80,000 in loans. I needed to feed myself, and I was you know what, this kind of feels like it'll work. So as a history major, became an investment banker, but I always had a interest in politics. My first internship in college was for Anthony Weiner, actually.
Oh.
His first summer internship, right before his first Twitter scandal broke out. So from there, I never went back. That's when I pivoted to business. I was I can't do this again. But the interest in news, especially news media, had always been there. And so I think after I luckily was covering media companies while I was a banker. So my clients were 21st Century Fox and Time Warner and all of these guys that run all of these news networks. And that gave me a really early glimpse into the industry. And then I had the opportunity to either become a private equity dude or work for a news company. And so I took the news company opportunity.
So did you start in your work in media? Let's just say digital media, just kind of narrow it down. Did you start at Vice or did you start in the media business elsewhere?
So I started at NBC Universal, and I was working in their news group, looking at all of their news brands. So MSNBC, Today Show, CNBC, NBC News Nightly, and that was business development and strategy. So basically what I was doing was actually trying to figure out how to utilize our digital audience. I think at the time, the focus was still television. That's where all of the ad dollars come in. It's television and on broadcast. And so they didn't really know what to do with their digital audiences. They wanted to attract younger viewers. They didn't know how to do that. And so I was trying to figure out how to do that, whether that was bringing on like YouTube stars on the Today Show or like whatever it was, but it was, or using an influencer strategy. I mean, they tried a lot. I think it's tough because those brands didn't necessarily resonate with millennials. And then I think until it became super political and partisan, did a lot of the broadcast news brands actually able to like monetize those opportunities, unfortunately. So
how lucky for all of us.
Yeah, I know. So I was at NBC, and then I kind of realized that they weren't really focused on digital as much as I wanted to be. I'm a kid of the internet. So I moved over to the Huffington Post and went like the complete other extreme. And when I was at the Huffington Post, I was in what we like to call merger mania. So Verizon bought Huffington Post's parent company, AOL. My job changed in the first month that I got there. I went from Huffington Post doing strategy there to doing strategy for 10 digital brands, all digital. TechCrunch, Huffington Post, AOL.com, you name it. And moved into a corporate role, essentially, and kind of started my first days firefighting. And it was 2.5 years there that then I went to Vice. But in between all of that, we also acquired Yahoo. So it was like a lot going on.
So it's like, welcome to Huffington Post. You now work for a different company.
Yes,
guess what? You now work for 10 companies. You wanted digital.
Now you work for an ad tech company. And so it just completely changed. I mean, I had to learn how essentially the entire advertising world worked on digital, not only just from a front end to like the consumer perspective, meaning like how do you actually monetize and create the best type of advertising content or branded content, but also how does all the technology behind it work, and how does programmatic work, and what does the ad tech stack look like? And I'm not a technical person, never took a computer science class. Again, I was a history and politics major. This is like fun learning curve.
And let this be a lesson to everyone listening. Liberal arts, you can do anything with that.
You really can. You really can. And so in those 2 years, Verizon acquired AOL. AOL then merged with Yahoo. And so that's kind of really what I was working on, which was trying to figure out how do you make this behemoth of two legacy digital media companies come together. And I think, people at the time conflated brand and essentially what is a portal page, right? Like that's what the value of yahoo.com was. That was the value of AOL, which is that hundreds of millions of people visited this site because there was a utility, whether it was email or anything else. But it wasn't a brand. It wasn't a consumer brand the way that I think about consumer brands today, which is you got to have a huge Instagram account. Like that's a consumer brand. And so that was kind of tough in terms of figuring out a strategy of like melding these two things together. And I got a call from Vice, and they asked me to come over to work in their digital business. And that's kind of how I got started at Vice about 3 years ago.
That's a good point about consumer brands. And Kenny and I have talked to a lot of different guests who talk about influence brands as personalities online. But you're very much right. I don't think I've ever met anyone who's like, I don't get my news from there. I'm a Yahoo person. Like I only go Yahoo homepage when it comes to that breaking news.
It's about new, especially news though. News is a commodity. Again, news is another utility. You need to get your information. And so like prior to all of these digital news brands, everyone was like, oh, okay, I watch, like my habit is to watch NBC, my habit is to watch CNN, my habit is to watch X. Watch is the key word, right? And then when digital came along, it kind of blew everything out of the water, and now everybody had access to thousands of articles, and everyone just kept reading, and now you create an entire market of aggregators and aggregation, right? And then you create an entire market of just really shitty advertising dollars that come through with little engagement. So there was no engagement behind all of those ads. It was just a matter of getting the ads on the page and then charging brands for those ads. And I think then 3 years later, what ended up happening was, oh, hey, where is the data behind the consumers looking at my ads? And everybody's like, well, I don't know.
Good question. Hold on.
Yeah, it's amazing. You even talk to the folks at like AppNexus, where that's their entire reason for existing, and it's still the data is not great.
No.
they have some that's maybe a little better than it used to be, but it's not like complete in any sense.
No, it's not. And I think it's even getting tougher when branded content came into the market, let's say circa like 2010, 2011-ish. It was like the first, like, what is native, and then what is branded, and what is custom production. It means the same thing. And then native kind of became something else in terms of display advertising. That also became really tough because what ended up happening was all these brands came into market and were like, we have a unique point of view and we have a unique user. And it's like, dude, like, I read the Refinery 29 article, and I read the Vice article, and I read the Huffington Post article. Why? Because Google like sent it to me. Like, Google showed it to me, and I just read all of them.
Right.
And so there is no such thing, especially in the digital media landscape. Like, there's no such thing as brand loyalty. I mean, people tell me all the time, like, I love Vice content. They're really talking about Vice News on HBO, right? So they're like, I love Vice. Like, I love watching Vice. And I'm like, you're talking about Vice News, and they're like, yeah. And like, that's really. And so that's tough in the sense that people like reading the Vice digital content too, because it's super edgy and it always gives like a different point of view. But again, it's all aggregated. Like, no one's going to your site anymore. Like, the idea of owned and operated sites is completely dead to me.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking. No, I'm kidding.
This is the JAKK Media podcast where we own and operate websites.
We're closing up shop. No, that's a really good point. And I think a lot of people sugarcoat it when it comes to their opinions on digital media. And it's really, there's something romanticized about thinking that consumers build brand loyalty in the news space, which is a commodity. Mm-hmm. And we operate in niche markets. And, we like to think that consumers really engage with our brands and build loyalty to our brands. And we do see engagement, and we do a lot of things to build engagement and to get feedback. But I think even there, and as you work up the chain, I mean, people are going to get the product where it's convenient for them.
Exactly. Sorry. So when I say owned and operated, when I said that very semi-controversial statement, I'm really talking about, I'm coming from the framework of news, right? Just news as a content genre. When I think about the digital media landscape today, the sites that are going to do better are actually fragmenting out into very niche markets. So they're focusing on like the point of view of the Black millennial, Blavity. They're focusing on the point of view of the trans millennial or the South Asian. Like, all of these sites are popping up in their niche little markets because they're like, hey, there are these essentially diasporas of people that exist, like in the United States especially, and in this current socioeconomic or sociopolitical time, we can actually talk to them in a voice that they're going to want to hear because they've never heard it before. Those sites I actually think are going to do well, even if people don't go directly to the site and type in the name and like, in a toolbar, it's more about that they will be able to reach an audience and actually be able to pitch that to brands in a way that all these other news brands have tried and did it for a while, but no longer can get that same unique reach because they're not in a niche. Mm-hmm. So just to add that nuance.
Well, I think you're seeing a lot of those brands, and I've talked to a few people who work at some of those brands and work with reader engagement, and they're seeing a massive amount of success on newsletters. If you had asked me 5 years ago what I thought the future of newsletters was, as far as like newsletters coming from websites, I would have said, like, what are you talking about? Mm-hmm. There's no potential there. And they're seeing a lot of engagement there because I think it echoes some of the reasons and the sentiments that you just mentioned. People feel like it's speaking to them. So when they see it in their inbox, it feels customized. It feels bespoke. It feels like it's talking about issues relevant to them in a way that is accessible to them.
Yep.
And so, I have heard from many of these brands, and we've seen it a bit with our own, that newsletter engagement is kind of actually increasing as people get over the hump. They're not so tired of that anymore. They're more targeted and more accessible. What other realms of engagement do you think some of these niche content brands are really succeeding in or may succeed in?
Experiential. So I think for me, experiential is huge in the sense that it's now, don't get me wrong, the conference space is like super crowded, but I think what's happening is that folks are like trying to create different types of both professional and like fun experiences. So I think if you look at Pop Sugar's like peer festival that they've done. That blows up amongst women all the time. Like, I get that every year they put it, the last 2 years that they put it on, always got sent to me by multiple women who are like, are you going to this? Are you buying a ticket, etc. And I think that's just because you get to be in a community of women. Like it doesn't happen often, unless you're going to some of the stuffier conferences that are more professionally focused. And this just is a fun way to blend all of that. And so I think, Blavity started Afrotech, and I think like all of those types of things that again speak to the same audience, but now as a real life experience. I think that's going to be really important, especially as we talk about aging down. Experiential is like number one way to connect with Gen Z, and they really care about that. Like, it's not even just about experiencing it in real life. They want to go through experiences on their phone. Like, they are looking for real life experiences in their technology. And I think they live in multiple realities, essentially. A lot of the games that Gen Zers play are essentially alternative reality games where they're like creating their own personas and lives. And like, it's like, what did we used to play? Sims, right? Like, I don't know if people still play that.
Great game.
Sims, RuneScape.
Yeah. So for our generation, they have like BitLife and like all these other games for their generation that they're really into. And I think that is going to speak, like, if these brands keep continuing down with those strategies and do them well, then they'll be able to age down successfully, which a lot of these older digital native brands were never able to do.
So where does this take us when we're thinking about Vice? Like, or where's Vice going? Because I know it's been a crazy year in the New York digital media landscape. Vice not excluded, nobody excluded, it seems. So Vice seems to be one that's hung on and changed their strategy and done some sort of pivot from the outside. But from the inside, like, what's going on? What are they all prioritizing? What is the new global strategy?
Yeah. So, I mean, for them, I think they're trying to, when Vice grew super fast, right? It was like really, really quickly. They kind of like hit every genre. They wanted to cover everything, but they still wanted to do it in their voice, and that was great. Now I think it becomes a little operationally unsustainable as a company. So I think what we've done essentially is looked at our entire portfolio across all 5 global businesses that we now have, and tried to find those areas in which like things can be consolidated operationally. So that's the internal piece. From an external standpoint, like we spent the last 4 years researching Gen Z, and trying to figure out how we're going to age down essentially. And I think they're able to do it really well right now because they started with Snapchat. We were early adopters. We were one of the first ones on Snapchat stories, we created branded packages in our Snapchat stories, and did that successfully. And we saw like extremely high engagement. I think we are one of the brands with the highest Gen Z audience from a brand perspective on Snapchat. So for now, the question was like, how do we have them resonate with Vice? Because they think that Vice is a Snapchat brand. And so like, how do you bridge that gap? And so that's kind of what we're working on, which is utilizing a lot of the research that we've done. So Vice has proprietary research that like they've done like all of these, essentially beyond surveying, spoken to a group of like few thousand members of the Vice community and outside the Vice community to basically manually gather all this data for literally like the last 4 years. So we're using those insights to essentially create new types of campaigns and new types of experiences and experiential packages to be able to actually attract this audience through advertising. And so I think that is actually going to work well, especially for a digital business. Mm-hmm.
So going back to focusing back more on Vice, did you start at Vice as the director of global strategy, or did you have to climb your way up that ladder? I climbed my way up that ladder. So I started out as a senior manager in operations in the digital business. So that's one of the 5 businesses that we run. And I did that for about a year. And then I had heard that we were thinking about starting a corporate strategy, like a group. Kind of got in touch with the person that was going to be in charge, talked to him, and we hit it off. And he was a really great guy. He's no longer at the company, but he's a great he's ended up being a mentor of mine, and helped me get into business school. So I wrote my recommendation letter, so I owe him one. Having centralized groups that you would typically see in like a traditional media company, not a thing at Vice. It was not a thing. Like every division functioned on its own. Every business kind of like ran its own thing, and there was no cohesion at the top. And so that cohesion started getting built out in the last like 3 years. And so I was a part of that cohesiveness that existed. And that essentially means that
instead of just looking at one business on a day-to-day, I now look at all 5. And another part of my job is to actually try to spot opportunities in which like the businesses can work together, right? Because the question then is like, well, how does the film studio work with digital? Well, we've realized like there's a lot of talent sharing that can happen. You can actually take a lot of the talent that we find in the digital production room and like the writers and editors. They're actually really good on screen. You could actually put them onto a script actually if they were fit for it, right? So there's a lot of, I hate to use this word, but synergies amongst those businesses. And I think that it just took us a while to figure out how to get that to scale.
That's the first like business buzz term. We're almost 20 minutes into this.
Oh, so I think I did pretty well.
Yeah,
Pretty good.
Okay.
That was pretty good.
Normally, synergy comes up within the first like 12 minutes of your average
Right.
business podcast. So
Your MBA friends are going to be disappointed, but Vice will like it. That's good.
So I think that's one of the biggest things. And I think with Vice, it's 25 years old, this company, right? Like our 25th anniversary is coming up this year, and it's gone. I mean, folks who have worked there and everyone that's helped to steer the ship they've gone through a lot. Everybody's kind of been through the ringer, not just within the company to try to make it grow as fast as it has, but also with what's been happening in media in general and what's been happening in politics. And that's been really big. I think the biggest thing is trying to balancing the ability to preserve the DNA in which this company came from back in 1994 and growing with our audience, right? So the millennials that loved us in 2007, we still want them to love us. Now they have kids. So it's like, how do you still make sure that you're still speaking to them? But then I still want my 12-year-old cousin to like kind of start reading my advice content, even though it's probably not appropriate. But like, I want to get that generation to catch on too, because what we're trying to build is essentially a voice that stands for something, and we're trying to stand for something. And that's really hard right now to be able to go cross-generational in that aspect.
So I want to definitely give the opportunity to, in this podcast, to chat about some of the other awesome work you do. Vice is just, one part of your impressive digital professional resume. If you go to kimpatel.com, you can see a lot of really cool info about projects you're up to. You're a speaker. You work with Harlem Capital. You work with a lot of different groups. So chat about some of that. What do you do when you're not directing corporate strategy and putting out fires?
So a few years ago, I realized that I was talking to a friend of mine. She was starting a company. I'd gone to NYU with her and worked at AOL with her. She's a few years younger than me, and she's super, super wicked smart product person. And she was like, Kim, I have no idea how to like start this company. She's like, what do I do? Am I an LLC? And am I C Corp? What is the cap table? Like, what investors should I be talking to? Do I have to raise right away? Like all these kind of, essentially what I would say like startup 101 type questions, but they're actually really complicated. And there's a lot of dependent variables. As a founder, I'm sure you know what that's like. And so I realized that I had been doing a lot of boring stuff in companies, like boring meaning like I was doing all this business stuff for a really long time at a very young age. And I worked for so many executives at a very young age that I actually understood how the world worked. And what that means is that I'm able to understand how essentially very influential, powerful Caucasian men in suits think. And I was able to take that and give her advice on how she should build out the company and how she should tell her story, especially when you're pitching to investors. Depends on the type of investor. And so as I started to do that with her, I realized how much I loved it. It was super early stage. She didn't even pre-seed, like pre-seed. And I helped her build out the go-to-market product, figure out the fundraising strategy. And now she is successfully in the middle of raising her seed round. And I kind of just became a pseudo advisor. I loved it. It was awesome. I mean, it just made me so happy to help her like have her vision come true. So I think that's kind of when I realized I was like a COO by trade. I have no desire to ever be a CEO. I love to execute, and so I started doing that more and more. People were referred to me, and so I spent a lot of my time just working with a lot of young, like, 24, 25, like folks in the city who wanted to start a company, who were bootstrapping and didn't know how to like get themselves out there, and needed access. And so I was like, I can give you some access. I don't know how much, but I'm going to try. if I believe in the product and I believe in you as a founder. So that's what I did. And then I ended up working with Harlem Capital as of this year. They just launched their first fund, and both managing partners just graduated from business school. And they're a fantastic team, and they're mission aligned in the sense that they're focused on minority and women founders at the early stage. And so I was like, oh, this is kind of perfect. And I wanted to actually understand what it was like to think about early stage investing. Like, what do people actually think about when they're like, oh yeah, I'm going to cut you a $500,000 check to go do this. And so I thought that was really important for me to know. And so that's kind of why I did it. One for me. And then also I just fundamentally, like, my life's mission is to even the playing field and just to help others. So I've always believed in that. It has a lot to do with the way that I grew up. And so this is just another way for me to do that.
Very cool. So what is your friend's app? You have to give her a shout out.
Oh yeah. So it's called Break the Love. So it's basically a mobile sports app. So essentially what she does is she helps you play tennis wherever you want, whenever you want. And she's actually scaling that to other sports. So she's doing a great job. She's ex-AppNexus, ex-Giphy, awesome person.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Are you a tennis player? Do you have like a vested interest in this beyond your friendship?
I'm not a tennis player. That was the funny part. But the reason why I loved it so much was because I'm like a beginner golf player. So my dad used to take me to mini golf when I was a kid. I used to go to the driving range, and then I was never like good at it. And then I just loved the sport. And I always just wanted to figure out what's an affordable way for me to play golf, even though I don't want to pay however much money I need to go at Chelsea Piers like every other night to go to the driving range. So I saw this as an opportunity to essentially get access to sports that, if you're coming from a low socioeconomic background, you don't have access to, whether it's tennis, whether it's golf, whether it's squash, and all these other sports that I didn't know about when I was 10. And so I saw that as a real opportunity.
I've been looking for an accessible way to get into polo, like full on extra horse, like full court polo with royals
you might
watching.
be able to rent some horses, rent some royals.
So if you
Uber for polo,
Uber for polo,
the Uber for polo, the Airbnb for thoroughbred horses.
Yeah.
You would never actually use thoroughbreds in polo. They don't have the disposition for that. Am I right?
Jeez.
I'm excited to see how that gets built out.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So what do you think is next for you? Like, not to say you would ever leave Vice Media, but if you were to go out there, like, who do you think's really doing it well? You mentioned some brands today that are some great brands that we all know and love, and why they're executing well. Who else do you think out there is poised to really be important in the digital scene? So,
I will say the one brand that I was very surprised about, well, not very surprised, I was happily surprised to see it succeed, right? And I think in the way that they've monetized, which is The Athletic, right? They actually went straight to market with the subscription product. And since then, I've seen them pop up in multiple pitch decks from different startup media companies, because it's like, oh, well, The Athletic went to market with the subscription product. We're going to become subscription. Now, the issue with that is that with those digital media brands competing for subscription dollars, you're competing now with Netflix and Hulu, right? By just becoming a subscription. So now as a mid-millennial, I'm contemplating, do I spend my discretionary income on my subscription to Netflix, Hulu, Rent the Runway, Spotify, my maybe 2 paid newsletters that I do, the New York Times, and now you. Your competition base has grown. The fact that The Athletic was able to do what they did and grow that audience, I think specifically because it's sports, and the way that people engage with sports is actually a fundamentally different consumer mindset than with other types of content. And so I think they knew that early on. So I think that was incredible and super impressive of them. I am concerned about how to monetize with other brands, especially if you become a subscription model. So, that's definitely one that's kind of hit it out of the park from a monetization standpoint.
Mm-hmm. And I think as of this recording, we're about a week out from their announcement that they officially have 500,000 paying subscribers.
Yep.
Which is pretty cool. Well, Kim, where can people follow along with you, learn about what you're doing, what you're up to, both in the corporate world and I would say outside the corporate world, but your advising is still very much in the corporate world?
Yeah. So, I also do a lot of mentorship. I work with Built by Girls. I'm a 3 times mentor there. I'm a big sister, so I do a ton of stuff in the community. You can follow me at kimkpatel.com. That's my website. If you have any questions, hit me up on LinkedIn. I always answer to the best of my ability, or just give me a shout out on Twitter, which is at KimPatel24.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.